Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Bernard Reynolds, Associate Director of Leadership and Organizational Development at Towson University. I am your moderator for this session of Teams, Teamwork Using DiSC to Achieve High Performance. A few housekeeping details before we get started. Audience microphones and telephones are muted. You can type questions and comments in this Q&A box at the bottom. We will monitor throughout the session, address them at the end of each presentation or at the end of the session itself. DiSC is shorthand for dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. These are the 4 different personality types we all exhibit in our daily lives. Our dominant type plus a combination of the other types impact the way we process information from others, how we communicate with staff, friends, and significant others. It shapes our relationships and our expectations of others, and ultimately it impacts our individual and team performance. DiSC is an assessment tool that we incorporate into our leadership and training development programs. And we have 3 panelists with us today to help us understand DiSC styles and how to use the assessment reports to improve ourselves and our teams. Our purpose for this webinar is to provide you with some practical information and more than a few ideas for building teams. Our agenda is simple. First, features and benefits. What is DiSC? But more importantly, why use it? What's in it for me and my team? Next, how does it work in the real world? We have examples of using DiSC to improve teams in the public sector and how it applies to large staff in higher education in the private sector. Our panelists are Tammy Ditzel, Anais Consulting, Elmer Coppage, Deputy Director of the Office of Training and Development for the Maryland Transportation Administration, and Vicki Simic, Associate Director for Continuing and Professional Studies at Towson University. Tammy has been doing workforce development since 1991. She is a master administrator and facilitator of everything DiSC and an authorized partner with Wiley Publishing. Tammy has been using DiSC in her organization and leadership development consulting practice for 17 years. Elmer supervises all learning and professional development initiatives for MTA's 1,600 bus and rail operators and 1,200 administrative staff. He manages a diverse training staff of 35 and has used DiSC to improve team dynamics and performance at MTA. Vicki is responsible for program development, management, and marketing of the non-credit certificate-based professional development courses administered through the university. She has delivered training and group team building exercises based on DiSC for executive teams and large staff. Let's get started. Tammy, when developing leadership and team building training programs for our clients, we promote the idea of evaluation and self-awareness for individuals, teams, and organizations. But there are many types of assessments out there. Tell us about DiSC.
Thank you, Bernie. Thanks for having me, and I just want to say a warm thank you and welcome to everyone on the webinar today. I'm excited to share DiSC with you. I use DiSC routinely in my coaching and consulting practice. It's a tool that can be applied immediately in the workplace. It breaks down barriers and builds bridges between coworkers. And what that does is it leads to higher performing individuals and higher functioning teams. So what I'd like to do first is tell you what DiSC is, but also what it is not. And let's start with what it's not, okay? First thing is, it's not new. The theory that DiSC is rooted in can actually be traced back to 444 BC. There was a philosopher back then by the name of Empedocles, and he noticed that people seemed to act in 4 distinctly different ways. And he compared those 4 ways to the 4 elements: fire, earth, air, and water. His theory and his philosophy was further refined later in history by Hippocrates, and then Carl Jung. If you know, took Psychology 101, Carl Jung was the original theorist behind the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And then finally, it got into the hands of a gentleman by the name of William Marston, and this was in 1928. And he took the philosophy, the theory, to a whole nother level. He wrote a book called Emotions of Normal People, developing what we know today as DiSC, which was further advanced by Harvard University. The second thing that you need to know about DiSC, that it is not a personality assessment. Many people think that it is, but it's actually a behavioral style assessment. It really only measures 2 of the 5 dimensions of personality. It does measure style as predictable traits that we act out in everyday life. Why do I use it? When I work with teams, when I work with leaders, when I work with individuals in the workplace, I look for 3 things. I look for adaptability, self-awareness, and humility. DiSC is a tool that allows us to really exercise all 3 of those things. It is my go-to tool for self-awareness, for helping people to understand not only themselves, but more importantly, others. And DiSC has direct, immediate application. It teaches us how to be adaptable, how to bridge those differences. And what we do is we kind of start to look at each other through a different lens. I've seen people in the workplace start to take things less personally. They understand that it's not really about them. The person that they're dealing with is just really operating within their style. When you take DiSC, you do receive a customized 20-page report that is chock full of applications out in the real world. So it is my go-to tool. I do want to talk a little bit about what we call cornerstone principles with DiSC. These are really the core values of DiSC. And so you can see in the little blue box off to the right, that writing is very small, so I've bumped it up on the left. You can see the first bullet there is equal value. I do not administer DiSC without really engaging people in these cornerstone principles. It's very important that everything we do revolving around DiSC can touch these cornerstone principles. Why? Because it reduces the chance of misusing DiSC in the workplace. The spirit of DiSC is really all about acceptance. It's about understanding. It should be used for good. And so the first cornerstone principle, equal value, means that regardless of where you fall on DiSC or your coworkers fall, there is equal value in each style. We need all 4 styles in a team to really be high functioning. The second cornerstone principle is about influence. We are influenced. Your DiSC style can change based on what you've experienced in your life, what you've experienced in your workplace. The third bullet is DiSC is a tool for self-awareness, but more importantly, you'll see below that, it's really about understanding others. And that allows you to build those effective relationships at work. When you have effective relationships at work, you have stronger teams. I would like to add one more thing to these cornerstone principles, and that is this. We have all 4 styles in us. That is so important because DiSC is not a tool that should be used to pigeonhole or label anyone. We have all 4 styles in us, but we do tend to gravitate to 1 or 2 styles. So the goals of the assessment are really to look at your style, explore the priorities that drive you in the workplace, and see where you fall on what's called the Everything DiSC Workplace Map. I'll show you that in a moment. And then the last goal is to really discover those similarities and bridge some of those differences that we have. So what I'd like to do is go through each of the styles quickly. The first style is dominance, D. What you will notice about people who gravitate to the D style is that they're extremely direct at times. They're very results focused. They can be firm, and the perception might be that they're a little strong-willed, maybe even forceful at times. But these traits are all rooted in the desire to achieve results. So they prioritize challenge, results, and action. These styles are all about getting it done. The I style stands for influence. You will notice that people who gravitate to the I style are very outgoing. They're very enthusiastic and optimistic, high-spirited, and even lively at times. They prioritize action, enthusiasm, and collaboration. And I styles are all about getting recognition, not necessarily for themselves, but they love to recognize others as well. The S style, steadiness. You will notice that people who gravitate to the S style are very even-tempered. They can be quite accommodating. They're patient. They're humble, and they're very tactful with their words. They prioritize collaboration, support, and stability. They're all about getting harmony in the workplace. And then finally, C is the conscientious style. They're quite analytical, reserved, very precise. Oftentimes, they're very private, and they're systematic in their approach. They prioritize stability, accuracy, and challenge. These styles are all about getting it right. When you take the DiSC assessment, you will get something that looks like what you see in the screen in front of you. This is called the DiSC Workplace Map, and you're going to notice that there will be a dot somewhere in that circle. Now, the dot can vary, okay? So just because you have someone who's an I style and you have a coworker, another coworker who's an I style, it doesn't make them identical. It depends where their dot falls. So you'll see on the left we have this slight inclination. In the middle, the moderate, and to the right, the strong. A dot's distance from the edge of the circle shows how naturally inclined a person is to encompass the characteristics of his or her DiSC style. So a dot positioned toward the edge of the circle indicates strong inclination. What does that mean? It means that they may not spill over as far into the C style, for example, as, say, someone who is slightly inclined. They might spill over quite a bit more into that C style. What does that mean? It means that if you're strongly inclined like me, I'm very passionate in my style. I'm very inclined to prioritize. It's important to me. I may sometimes be slightly less adaptable than someone who is slightly inclined, okay? But I'm very decisive. For someone who's slightly inclined, they spill over into those other quadrants. And it's a beautiful thing because they're quite adaptable. They have this ability to kind of see all sides of a situation. The challenge for them is that they can be sometimes paralyzed by that. So they may appear as indecisive. Let's talk about the priorities of the DiSC style. I mentioned those earlier when I went through each of the 4 styles. Imagine this screen laying flat on a table. If I were to take a pin and stick it in the dot that you see on the screen and take a small rubber band and stretch that rubber band, this screen shows you how far this individual can stretch over to that C style without pain. In other words, this highlights this person's comfort zone. So you can see this person has all 4 styles in them. They can stretch quite comfortably over to the C style, the D, and the S, okay? And this would be without pain, without really having a lot of stress or anxiety, all right? Now, that doesn't mean that we can't stretch. For example, this person could not stretch all the way over to challenge or all the way down to stability. They can stretch that far, but they might be a little tired at the end of the day, okay? On the right side, you're going to see something really interesting. It's called a statistical tail, and you'll notice those lines that kind of stretch over to the word accuracy. What that means is that this person has stretched their rubber band so frequently over to accuracy that they're really good at it now. That muscle is pretty strong and that rubber band is pretty pliable. This could be, for example, somebody who has been in a job for many years that requires them to be very detailed, okay? So this is important for you to know because this is adaptability in its true sense. In my coaching work, a lot of times, if I were coaching this person, many times my coaching work will involve how to help them manage their time so that they can be more focused on accuracy. That's a further stretch for them, okay? Let's go to the next screen. I want to talk to you a little bit about the training that goes along with DiSC. So can you take just the assessment? Yes, you can. But if we're really going to talk about high-functioning teams, the team needs to do the DiSC assessment and participate in team training together, okay? Very critical. It really helps them get to a higher place of high function when they're together. They're sharing one another's styles, and they're engaged in activities that are really helping them to understand those who might be a little bit different. So without this application, it's really going to be hard for your team to get to that higher, to move the needle, to become more higher functioning. So the training is essential to your team as a whole. So in the training, you're going to discover your DiSC style naturally. You're going to understand others and learn how to build more effective relationships. Now, we've got 6 goals of the training program. I use a variety of activities. We have individual reflection, small group activities, large group activities, role playing, and all of these things are done to achieve these goals. So the first goal is discover your reaction to different DiSC styles. Identify what works for you and challenges you. But again, number 3, to understand the people around you. Now, goals 4 through 6 is really where the training takes on the application of this. There's a lot of videos in the training where we learn how, and we look at case studies on how others have bridged differences. And then we practice that. How do we actually use it? We role play, we practice. And then finally, we develop an action plan. So on page 16 of the 20-page customized report, there's strategies to increase the effectiveness in the workplace of that individual. And we take one of those strategies and we develop an action plan around that. We also need to make sure that we develop an action plan for the team as a whole. This is not a training where we're going to leave and we're going to let this information get dusty. Okay, very important. We have just discovered a common language, so we have to keep it alive. So we incorporate training aids. This is one of them. This is called a style guide. And typically my clients will hang this up in their cubicle or on their office or on their door as a gentle reminder, hey, here's who I am, and here's how you can work best with me. It really keeps DiSC going and keeps it alive. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to turn it back over to Bernie, and please feel free to type any questions you have. We'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Tammy. Here's a question. The DiSC report, which is very detailed, 16 pages, is created for an individual. How does that actually relate to team building?
Okay, great question, Bernie. The team building really honestly takes place in the training, and that's why the training is so important. Now, in the assessment, there are many applications buried in there that you can learn how to adapt your own behavior depending on the style of the person you're dealing with. Here's the challenge. If you're not in a team environment, if you're not in the training, you won't know the styles of the other people around you necessarily. So how can you really adapt your behavior without knowing the styles of the other people? So DiSC is meant to be shared. It's meant to be a safe playing field where everyone's on the same level. And that's where the team building magic really happens, is in the training.
So you're saying that by sharing our styles with each member of our team, we've kind of created a safe zone to maybe talk out some of the team dysfunction issues, such as trust, communication?
You bet. By having an objective tool like this, it really takes the person, we tend to focus on solving problems and making decisions together as opposed to focusing on the person. You start to realize, okay, this person didn't wake up this morning trying to figure out how to ruin my day, right? They're just being in their style. So absolutely, it's a very safe zone for them to have these real conversations.
Well, thank you, Tammy. We're now to our next panelist, Elmer. As a director and manager of a diverse team of trainers, how did you address improving professional skills and team performance, and what part did DiSC play in your training event?
Well, this plays a huge role in how we conduct business here at the MTA as it relates to training, Bernie. And this is one of those tools that allowed us to be successful. So, to discuss how the M.MTA utilized this assessment to fit our business needs here, one of the things that we wanted to do is we use the Kirkpatrick model here, and our number one goal is to get the desired results. And so we asked ourselves, what are some of the things that we would like to see as a relate of utilizing this? And one of those things that we looked at was to increase self-knowledge and how we respond to conflict, which motivates us and what causes us stress, and how we solve problems. That was one of the points that we wanted to make sure that we get the desired results that we're looking for. In addition, we wanted to be able to facilitate better teamwork and minimize team conflict. And last but not least, we wanted to develop stronger skills by identifying and responding to internal customer styles. Oftentimes, we don't look at the internal customer service aspect of what we do, and that's one of the things that we pride ourselves on here at the M.MTA. So one of the things that we utilize to help us get to this point is we looked at the aspect of generational learning, which is a key element into how we facilitate to adult learners. And so we use this general learning chart to support that effort. One of the things that we wanted to get our team to understand is that how can we reach different aspects of the adult learner using our experience as a team. And so if you look at the chart here, you will see different generationals from seniors all the way down to generational Z. And we looked at the training aspect of it, their learning styles, communication, problem solving, how they like to make decisions, their leadership style, of course, how they prefer feedback and their use of technology, and how often do they change jobs. And so we incorporate that with the DiSC assessment. As Tammy mentioned earlier, it focuses on your workplace profile. And as a team, it's no way that we can support what we do here at the MTA without understanding ourselves as a team. And being one of the leaders on this team, we felt that the DiSC assessment of everything DiSC, I should say, would be a valuable tool for us to get to where we need to be. Another tool that we utilize in the Office of Training and Development is Maslow hierarchy of needs. So we use this tool to incorporate how people prefer to learn and how it affects the ability of people to learn. Again, we incorporate this tool with everything DiSC. To give you an example how we utilize the DiSC here at the MTA, recently the Office of Training and Development was tasked with supporting our support team, which is the executive team here at the MTA. And one of the things that we did, we teamed up with Tammy and we utilized what we called Everything DiSC Work of Leaders. And as Tammy mentioned, there are several branches of Everything DiSC. And Work of Leaders was one of the tools that we used to support the leadership team here. We felt it was important for the leadership team to understand how the team viewed them as leaders, to see if they were on the right page in terms of the vision, their building alignment, and champion execution, which is very important. And so when you look at those three aspects of Work of Leaders, it was huge for that particular training session for our leaders. And they took a lot from this particular session, which allowed them to go back to their respective departments and look at how they can better support their team utilizing Everything DiSC. One of the benefits of the DiSC assessment that we utilize is the team results. It is very important as leaders to understand your work profile of all of the folks on your team. And so when you look at achieving the results as a team, the DiSC assessment is huge. It plays a major role in helping us accomplish that goal. I'll give you an example. One of the things that we have here in the Office of Training and Development is what we call an annual retreat. And we are going on our 7th year of having this retreat. And this retreat is where we provide team building and team development for our team. And back in 2016, we implemented the DiSC, Everything DiSC. And so as a result of that, we were able to do a lot of great things. But one of the things that we made a vow to do is we want everybody on our team to understand how to better communicate and work more productively as a team. So we encouraged everybody on our team to put in their email heading their exact DiSC style. For example, I'm an ID. And so whenever you see an email correspondence from myself, you will see my work profile. And it's just a reminder to folks on the team how to better communicate with me in terms of my work profile. And so that's just an example of how we use the DiSC. And it has paid huge dividends for our entire team. So some of the team highlights that we have as a result of implementing the DiSC is build productive training staff. We've been able to develop effective managers, instructors, support staff, and leaders within the Office of Training and Development. It helps us train a powerful workforce. It helps us improve customer service internally and externally. And as I mentioned earlier, customer service is important here at the M.MTA, not just external customer service, but internal customer service, which is very important to our agency. Also, it helps us with change and conflict management. Conflict management, it can be challenging for teams at times. And I can truly say that the DiSC assessment allowed us to be honest with each other in a most appropriate way. It allowed us to be vulnerable to where we can share information without causing unnecessary conflict. We like to say healthy conflict here at the M.MTA. And last but not least, it also enhanced the counseling and coaching experience. The way that I communicate with the three managers that we have on our team has been huge, to say the least. Effective coaching, counseling is the monument of leadership. And so it allows us to effectively work together. So this concludes my presentation. I just want to thank the panel members and all of you that are listening. And I'll leave you with this quote that we utilize in the Office of Training and Development. It says, "If you change nothing, nothing will change." And I'll go back to what Tammy mentioned earlier. Tammy talked about the difference between adaptability and change. As we all know, change is permanent, but adaptability is all about how far you can stretch your rubber band, how far you can stretch and go back to your comfort zone. So I think if I could leave anybody with a message is this, to understand the difference between the two, and it will help you be very effective with using everything DiSC. Thank you.
Thank you, Elmer. Here's a question. The slide about generational learning was very interesting, and a lot of times it's applied to understanding the workforce in terms of their cohort age segment. But you married it with DiSC. Did the DiSC behavioral model really help to bridge some of those differences between as many as 3 to 5 generations within the workforce?
Oh, definitely. And the best way that I can describe this is that as it relates to how we engage our adult learners, I would definitely have to contribute that to the DiSC, everything DiSC, because it gave our instructors, our training professionals, a different outlook on themselves and how they can better support the adult learners here at the M.MTA. So yes, it's been huge to say the least.
Well, thank you, Elmer. For our next panelist, Vicki Simic. Vicki, MTA used DiSC with a small team all working within the same unit, but your experience is different, and you have 2 case studies to share with us focused on leadership teams and large staff groups. Tell us about that.
Well, thanks, Bernie. I do want to talk about 2 case studies, both of which I've been pretty intimately involved in. One was a large regional healthcare system, and the other one is in higher education, or eds and meds, if you will. Let me start with case 1, and that's a story of 3 regional hospitals that combined to become one hospital, that shut down 3 regional institutions and actually opened up a single new facility. And it's really more of a story of change management, though, than it is integration. And it starts with 3 really diverse communities that are contiguously located within a small population center about 50 miles south of Philadelphia. Over more than 100 years, these communities have competed against each other in benign things like high school sports, and also for more important things such as teachers and doctors and new business opportunities. So the people that lived in each community were very, very different based on immigration routes, people who came in during World War II to work in the factories, and so you had really diverse communities. Town B, for example, represented people mostly of Italian and Jewish descent that had come over prior to World War I. The other towns represented a group that was mostly blue-collar workers that had come right during World War II to take over the glass manufacturing facilities. So you start to get the picture of 3 really different and diverse communities. Each one had a building in it that was about 100 years old, some of them maybe more than 100 years old, and they had served as their medical facilities. but the old buildings couldn't be restored anymore. They had been built upon and built upon as far as they could go. And under a new rule in New Jersey, this healthcare setting was able to get permission to build the first new hospital in what had been almost 40 years. And that's kind of where the story starts. So the employees from Hospital A and B and C needed to come together, and the leadership team brought, I was working at a higher institution program at the time, and brought us in and said, what are we going to do? What's the best way for us to pull this together? And so we started with the executive team, and it was their first time using DiSC, so we're really going back almost 18 years. And we used DiSC to help the senior leaders understand their style and how their style relates to change. So we're gonna pull that back here in just a minute. There we go. So when we work with the leaders, and there were about 12 of them in the room, what I saw was pretty much what I had expected to see. So if you look at the top of the quadrant, you're going to see the D and the I, and the D and the I have a tendency, because of the dominance, because of the ability to manage change rather easily. That's where you often find leadership. And right there on the edge of the C and the D were the people you would expect to see: legal, you would expect to see compliance, and finance. And that's exactly who those three people represent. In fact, one of those CDs was the president, became the president many years later. What's interesting, though, is take a look at the little white dot over in the S. And that was one person who actually wasn't in the top of the quadrant and was in a completely different quadrant. And as I was going through the DiSC, I could see the panic look on his face. And eventually he called me and said, Vicki, I got to do this DiSC again. I said, well, could you explain to me why? And he said, well, I just don't fit in with everybody else, and I think that there's a mistake here. I actually didn't think it was a mistake. I thought it was a great opportunity, because the person who was the S was also the Vice President of Human Resources. And I worked with him afterwards. We did some coaching, and when I had a chance to work with some other leaders, I tried to help them to understand what his role was and what he brought to the leadership picture. And in the end, he accepted being an S, and I think he actually, when he changed his name to Vice President of People, I thought he has really embraced what S's are all about. Over the period, what we tend to do is build a curriculum that all of the leadership and managers would eventually be able to use. And we started each section that we opened with DiSC. And we believe that self-knowledge is vital if you're going to try to understand change. And one of the things real quickly about DiSC is the window here where I look at the 4 quadrants: things I know about myself, things I don't know about myself, things others know about me, and then things that others don't know about me. We also call this the Johari window. And things I know about myself, everybody knows about that. That's kind of like the arena. Things I don't know about myself, well, that's the blind spot. The hidden arena, that arena isn't going to become unhidden unless you want to change it. Then there's that piece of us that we don't know and nobody else knows, it's unknown, and we can't tap into that. It's the blind spot that DiSC can help us tap into. And many, many times when I'm doing this, I hear the ahas in the audience as people realize, oh, wow, I guess I knew that about me, but I didn't know that everybody else knew that about me. And so whenever we have a chance to peer into a blind spot, I think it's a really good opportunity for us. Over the next 6 years, in fact, I worked with this client for much longer than that period of time, but we frequently were called upon to come in and we used DiSC as an intervention. If they had new team leaders, and sometimes the leadership came from the rank and file, and those folks didn't always have the leader preparation that they needed, but it wasn't, we could take them out and put them in supervisory training, but it really didn't make an impact until we brought them together with their teams and worked on DiSC. Also, we had areas of dysfunction over the years where they would call me and say, we got a problem here. We don't really know what that problem is. We'd start with DiSC, and that would give us a really good place to start with an assessment. Oh, look at this. You have a CS who is trying to manage 5 DIs. So we have to think about what that means and how that can change. Over the course of many years, I did a lot of training with these folks, but it was the most frequently requested class that we did. Case 2, higher education, a little more recent. This started in 2018. It started also with the leadership team, and I guess everybody probably realizes that if you can't get buy-in from the leadership, you're not going to get what you need. Started with a leadership team of about 15 people, and then we rolled out to 60-plus divisional staff members. And it was interesting. So the styles within the leadership team are what I expected, but the styles within the staff were not at all what I expected. And we kind of wondered, how could this inform us on multiple issues such as communication? What were people's ability to change? What did that look like? How did they integrate with generational differences? And what does that mean in terms of motivation and reward? So this is the leadership distribution, and as you can see, it's not too badly, it's pretty much what you would expect. Almost equal numbers of C's, I's, D's, and S's. One extra C, one S less, but with so many S's on that line there, it's pretty much the same thing. I don't often see that in a leadership distribution. As we saw before, most of the leaders I see are going to be in the D and the I range. I thought this was a really good sign for this organization, that it was so nicely distributed. But take a look what happens when we actually look at the leaders or the DiSC styles of the rest of the organization. Heavily C, heavily S, and the people who are in the D and I range were some of the leadership, not all of the leadership, but a really different picture than what you might expect. Now, if I were in a healthcare setting, I wouldn't be surprised to see large numbers of S's, sometimes S's and C's, especially when you're working with nurses and other clinicians who are needing to do diagnostic work. But I didn't expect to see this in a higher educational institution. Although, I'll be honest with you, the work that they were doing, the work that was being done by and large in this division was analytical, challenging, close scrutiny types of work. And so from that perspective, the division really did make sense that it would be largely S's and C's. But the other question is, how do you manage a group of so many C's and S's, especially if you're up in that upper quadrant of D's and I's? And so I'm going to, can you take me back to my last slide? Going back to I just want to kind of flip this back for a second. So how does this group manage the other group? Well, if you're an S or a C, you're probably going to still have some questions. If you're a D and an I, there are probably some things that you don't understand. I mean, D's are really, really different from C's. And so what we were trying to accomplish was, how can we really give people an opportunity to get a better sense of who they are and how they react to things? I'm going to move this along. Some takeaways. Communications and the patterns of communication are still kind of challenging for us in some areas, especially those areas that tend to be more homogenous. Younger employees, there are a lot more younger employees than there are older employees. We haven't done the generational glimpse yet, although I have to say Elmer kind of inspired me on that. But I think there's an opportunity to look at DiSC styles integrated with some generational information. And Bernie, that's all I have.
Well, thank you, Vicki. For these two case studies in which you had a long-term relationship with in the healthcare and then here in higher education, and you did a lot of different training, what were the most effective team-building exercises that you use incorporating DiSC?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that question. And I think Tammy might have alluded to it. So one of the things that I always try to do is once we do the DiSC exam and everybody knows where they fall, I try to get them at tables with people like themselves. And so I want them to spend time talking in the group of people who are very like-minded and really kind of focusing on what do we all have in common. And then I separate them up and I put them at tables with other people who are not like them and start to force some exercises onto them where they have to think from a very different perspective. So if you're a D, I really need you to think like a C. If you're an S, let's try what it feels like to be in the shoes of an I or somebody who has a high D profile. So trying to get people to, A, understand who they are, but maybe more importantly, to start to do that flexing where they begin to understand what other people might be like. And I don't know if it was Elmer or Tammy who said, I know that person didn't get up this morning planning to ruin my day. And I think that at some point we all have to come to that conclusion that People really don't get up out of bed planning to ruin your day. They're just being the best selves they can be as a D, as an I, as an S, or as a C. So our job becomes walk a mile in my shoes for a bit.
All right, thank you. Just want to spread the questions around our panelists a little bit here. Tammy, you didn't talk too much about where you can find the assessment and how do you actually take it. Can you just describe that just briefly?
Absolutely. So I am an administrator of DiSC, and I'm an authorized partner with Wiley Publishing. So you can certainly reach out to me through my website. I am a partner with Towson University. So even reaching out to Bernie after the session today, after this webinar, the DiSC is sent via email. It's a link. And so whenever I have a group that I'm preparing to work with, they each receive a link to complete the assessment. It takes about 15 minutes. They do not receive their results right away. They receive their results at the training.
Okay, great. Elmer, I love that enhancement where you actually use your DiSC designation on your email. Are there any other tips and tricks that you use to kind of keep the session alive throughout the year?
Yes, we required all of our staff to post the different work profiles in their workstation so that they can review it on a consistent basis to act as a constant reminder of how we can support each other and understand each other in terms of working together. Definitely with our meetings, we utilize this a lot.
Tammy, I would imagine, since Wiley also publishes the 5 dysfunctions of teams, that there are quite a few team-building exercises one could use in incorporating DiSC. Is that true?
Absolutely. So in the training, there's a lot of exercises that the team goes through. As Vicki said, I couldn't have said it better, putting them with like-minded people in the beginning and then kind of mixing them up in the afternoon. And I like to really have them reflect on that. What was it like this morning compared to solving that problem this afternoon? And they laugh and they say, it was a lot easier this morning. It was more challenging this afternoon. But what I find, and I couldn't agree more with Vicki, when you have diversity on a team, the outcome is usually better. And it might take longer to get there, but the outcome is typically better than if you had a team where there was a lack of diversity in style. So through the training, there's a lot of team activities that we do. Now, 5 behaviors of a cohesive team is a whole different assessment, believe it or not, but it does pull from your DiSC data. So they talk to each other, which is a beautiful thing.
Vicki, you and I had some fun with DiSC, with our teams, our division, and I've talked to Tammy about this as well. How in the world did you get Game of Thrones and DiSC into the same training session?
Well, I'm going to age myself if I tell you when I first started training with DiSC, we were using the characters from Charlie Brown, and that's, Charlie Brown's the S and Lucy's the D. And over the years, I realized that I really needed to make some adjustments. And we have, over the years, it's gone from Charlie Brown to Friends. That's probably not very new. So it's a Big Bang Theory. And then when we started putting this material together for the recent thing that we did, we decided to do something really adventurous, and we went with Game of Thrones. And I don't know how many people out there are Game of Thrones fans, but we really had a good time doing it. And you could probably guess, who the high D would be in Game of Thrones. That would be Cersei Lannister, if anybody watches Game of Thrones. I think we're a bunch of geeks over here because we all watch it. And we kind of went through the various cast members and decided who the D, who the I, who the S, and the C was. And I think I don't want to say humanized it because obviously it's to go well beyond humanization, but people who are interested in how a series cast members integrate and interact with each other, you're already starting to pull some data that they already have in their, in their living experiences to the center of what we're going to talk about, which is, personality styles and characteristics of how people behave.
So it's just another way to kind of make this a little more memorable and stick to your mind about how a DiSC works. Well, our time is up. Thanks to our audience for attending this webinar, and a special appreciation to our panelists, Tammy Ditzel, Elmer Coppage, and Vicki Summit for their time and expertise. There is an audio recording and copies of slides for this webinar will be available from Towson University after Thanksgiving. To learn more about the programs, classes, and services available from leadership and organizational development, and about continuing and professional studies here at Towson, please click the link on the screen, or Google us at Leadership and Organizational Development, Towson University.